Just as a quick introduction of what the Office for AI is, sometimes we feel we're at the center of the everything that's going on, but I take it that is not very well known to everyone what we actually do behind the doors. So we're actually a team in the UK government. We're part of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and we're tasked with a very fun task recently to ensure that the uptake of AI technology is done in a responsible and safe way. We're doing this by implementing the National AI Strategy, which was published in September 2021, and that was setting out our vision for remaining a global superpower in technology, science, and especially AI technologies as well. So the National AI Strategy set out 3 of the key pillars which we're currently working on to ensure that that vision is realized. The first one was to invest in the long-term needs of the AI ecosystem. So we have, for example, part of the team which is looking at things like how do we invest in the critical resources that we need in order to grow AI in the UK. That includes, for example, investment in compute, and we have recent announcements around that, investment in foundation models capabilities with the foundation model task force that was recently announced, for example. And then we're also looking at ensuring that the benefits of AI are felt across the UK as a whole, instead of just very specific regions. We're also looking at things like skills with that in mind, so thinking about how we upskill, for example, people in the UK who are being affected by the deployment of AI across different sectors, in making sure that they can benefit from the development and use of AI instead of being replaced, for example. And then we have the third pillar, which is where I'm focusing on, which is on governing AI effectively, not just domestically, but also internationally. And that is where the AI white paper sits. So this AI regulation white paper represents our vision for how we should be regulating artificial intelligence in the UK in a way that is balancing the risks that the AI technology brings, but also making sure that we also benefit from the opportunities, the incredible opportunities that these technologies also bring to the UK and globally. So with that in mind, we published the AI regulation white paper back in March 2023, which seems like a very long time ago now, given everything that's happened. We, of course, are very aware of recent developments that have happened around that timeline as well, with the release, for example, of ChatGPT and increasing narratives around the risks, for example, of artificial intelligence. And what we wanted to do in our approach that is still holding with everything that is going on at the moment is that we wanted to have an approach that, again, was balancing the risks and potential of artificial intelligence, but was also adaptable. So something that we can keep iterating on, for example, based on how AI technologies are developing to ensure that responsible AI is realized, but also we're not stifling innovation by having something that it becomes out of date as the technology evolves. So how we did that is that we set out 5 cross-cutting principles that reflects our vision for what responsible AI should look like. These are based on the OECD principles for AI, which hopefully some of you are familiar with. I won't go into much details on that, but they include hopefully sensible things like safety, security, and robustness, accountability and governance, appropriate transparency and explainability, and also contestability and redress and fairness. So we base them on the OECD principles to make sure that we also look at international interoperability. So we wanted to use principles that are globally recognized as a basis for what responsible AI should be looking like. And then we rely on our very expert UK regulators to interpret these principles in their specific sectors and apply them. This means that they will translate them, for example, in guidelines for businesses on how transparency and explainability, what they mean in specific sectors such as data protection, for example, medical devices, and so on. We also set a set of central functions, which will be our main mechanism for implementing our approach in practice. And the central functions, which I can go in more details later, are basically our main feedback loop that we have to monitor how the AI technology is developing and updates that we might need to our framework in order to keep pace with that. So we will be working very closely with other stakeholders, such as regulators, for example, as well as researchers and industry, to keep track of emerging opportunities and emerging risks in the AI landscape, and monitor how effective our current framework is in addressing those. And again, where we identify gaps, for example, because a specific AI risk doesn't fall, for example, in a particular remit of a regulator, or there's not clear guidance around it, we are keeping our cards on the table to introduce additional interventions as needed in the future. But this needs to be evidence-based and as agile as possible in order to, again, avoid having something that becomes out of date very quickly. And then the final point that I'll mention on some of the key characteristics of our approach is also that international collaboration and interoperability is really at the core of it. We realize that AI regulation is a challenge that cannot be solved by a single country. It's very much an approach that needs to be taken jointly with our international partners. We are facing common challenges such as the regulation of generative AI, for example, and foundation models. The AI life cycle itself is like very complex and spans across different borders. So international collaboration and interoperability is really critical for us. And we recognize that by seeing, for example, a role in tools for trustworthy AI, such as technical standards and assurance techniques, which I can expand later on if there is interest, in, for example, implementing our principles in practice by providing processes, for example, to translate what transparency and explainability means in practice for industry, but also to boost this international interoperability, because regardless of the specific regulatory form, I would say, that different countries are taking. So we have more voluntary approaches, for example, in the US, more horizontal law in the EU. We can see some common denominators across all of these approaches. For example, in the principles that we all want to achieve, ensuring that there is human-centric principles at the core of how AI has been developed and used. And also there will be convergence in some of the tools that people will use to apply these principles in practice. So technical standards, for example, are an example of how the EU is seeing a role for them to provide presumption of conformity with regulatory requirements. Similarly, in the US, even if the approach is more voluntary, the NIST AI risk management framework is still recognizing them as good practice for risk management when it comes to AI.